And I'm now joined by Aontu leader Peader Toibin, who's also a TD for Meath East, I think.
Meath West.
Meath West.
Meath West,
I keep getting that one mixed up.
They should partition our county in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. But Peader, it's very, very busy time here in Dail Eireann, and immigration is a big issue. At your own party conference, you passed a motion on Ireland withdrawing from the EU migration pact, and you've also discovered figures that Ireland last year spent over 1 billion on accommodating asylum seekers and refugees.
Yeah, so the issue of immigration is still a massive issue, to be honest. And we found out in Aontu that the government is spending 1.2 billion euros this year just on the accommodation of asylum seekers in IPASS centres. And according to the Minister for Justice, 80% of asylum applicants so far this year have actually failed. So that leads you to believe that the vast majority of asylum applicants currently are people who are not fleeing war and violence. And the system should only be for those who are fleeing war and violence. So what we're looking for is a far stricter system, a faster system, so that we can identify those who need help and those who don't need help much sooner. And that would reduce the numbers in IPASS accommodation. It would reduce the pressure on the system. And it would send out a message internationally that Ireland is not a soft touch, that we are a strict country. Do not come to this country unless you're actually fleeing war and violence.
And with IPASS centres, the planning rules have been relaxed massively, and we are seeing applications for IPASS centres in various different parts of the country. You've been saying that those relaxations should stop.
Yeah, so the planning system is a democratic system where communities have a say over what kind of development happens in their area to make sure that developments are of a standard and supports are in place so that those developments can be dealt with. But the government got rid of those planning standards for IPASS, allowed for exemptions for them. So we aim to a writing legislation as we speak, which would actually return the planning system fully to IPASS locations. Because right now you have speculators across the country making hundreds of millions of euros, becoming mega wealthy very, very quick. And they're creating stresses and strains and anxiety amongst many communities. We want the planning system returned to IPASS immediately.
Absolutely. And recently we spoke with Sean Moynihan, who's CEO of Alone, which is a charity that supports older people in our society. And to be honest, some of the findings were quite stark. They do an audit of their service, and 68% of those older people that contacted Alone for their services, loneliness was a big issue as well.
Yeah, I think what's happening to older people in this country is shocking, and people would have seen the RTE investigates study into what's happening in nursing homes in some parts of the country. First of all, the whole country is becoming more isolated. We are, as a community, less engaged with each other, and that has a very damaging effect. Secondly, the level of supports for older people are not what they should be. The level of investment into older people's services are not what they should be. And we do, as families and as a society, need to take more responsibility into that. We need more investment into services for older people. They built this country. They raised this generation. We owe them a debt of gratitude and also a debt of actually providing proper services for them.
Yeah, and I know rental and the rental sector is very much in the news this week. But by 2030, there's going to be 1 million people over the age of 65 in our country. Now that's only five years away, and there are a lot of older people that are going to be retiring into the rental sector. And Sean Moynihan said we'd need 125,000 rental units to meet that demand.
So this is the really sad thing that's happened. So first of all, older people are far more susceptible to increases in prices right across the market. So we've had massive cost of living increases in recent times, and that's hurt older people. But then, of course, we have had just a housing crash back in 2010, where a lot of people, lost their houses and were forced into rental accommodation. And now that we see a lot of older people dependent on rental accommodation, they're at the mercy of the whims of the landlords. And the government, unfortunately, are taking off the only brake that there exists on rents currently in this country. Like, it's quite incredible. Rents are too high. They're going up, and the government has introduced a plan to increase rents. And that's going to hit older people the most because they have the least flexibility in their incomes. And, it is extremely costly to put older people into nursing homes. We want older people to be as independent for as long as possible in their own homes. But that's going to be becoming increasingly unlikely as older people are stuffed because they can't pay the rents that are there. And it is a function of the government's complete catastrophe when it comes to housing, that so many older people are dependent on rental accommodation and are exposed now to this crisis of increasing rents.
And are you worried that the changes to the rent pressure zones is going to see not just older people, but younger people be at risk of being evicted?
Yeah, I think it's just like it just shocks me that we have Micheál Martin, right? First of all, who was a minister in the cabinet that crashed this country, drove the country off the edge in terms of the last housing crisis. His policies created an enormous spike in house prices around 2008. His policies directly led to the next crash in rents and house prices just after that. And now he's again in a cabinet which is spiking rents again. I don't think there's any minister in any government anywhere in the country that's responsible for two spikes in rents and prices and also a crash at the same time. And how he expects us to believe him when he's saying that by taking the brakes off increasing rents, it's some way going to actually reduce rents for people. It's simply not going to happen. This government are exposing people to international investment funds who are seeking to increase rents just for their own profitability.
And I don't know whether you've seen a report from the Children's Alliance group there during the week, and in their report they found that there are over 100,000 children who are living in consistent poverty. Surely, in an age where we're seeing government, definitely at the last election, talking about the sums that were coming in taxes, etc. Surely in 2025 that shouldn't be happening.
Well, if you listened to Simon Harris before the election, he said he wanted to make Ireland the best country in Europe to be a child. And it's simply not the case. Right now, I'd say on a range of different indicators, the quality of life for so many young people is actually reducing. 100,000 children in poverty when last year the state put 8 billion euros into the bank because it was a surplus that they couldn't spend. That's shocking. What we in Aontu would like to see, we would like to see a second rate of child benefit put in place, which is means tested, and would mean that money would be focused on the families and the mothers and the children of those who are in consistent poverty. We're not looking to change. We want obviously to see the general child benefit increase over time. We don't want the means test on that. We want an additional second rate of child benefit just for those children who are in poverty to help them improve their livelihoods. But I will say as well, we need to strengthen families, because one of the things that's actually causing poverty amongst children at the moment is the fact that families are breaking down. And families are breaking down because of the stresses and strains of this country. The stresses in housing, the stressing of living in a commuter hell, and the financial stresses that people are being put under. And we need fathers to take responsibility for the children that they bring into this world. And that's not happening either. And it's completely forgotten about in there.
And speaking of commuter hell, you're also in your own constituency part of the Navan Dublin rail line committee. Like Navan, the size of the town that doesn't have a rail line into Dublin, in 2025 is crazy as well.
Yeah, listen, I've been the chair of the Meath on Track campaign for the last number of years. Navan is the biggest town in the country without a rail line. 80,000 people every morning drive to work. More Meath people leave the county to work than actually work in the county. That happens in no other county in the country. And the original rail line to Navan to Dublin, which was pulled up by 1960s Fianna Fáil government, but that original rail line was built in 3 years with picks and shovels.
Wow.
And right now, this government have been talking about it for 20 years and are still not going to build it for another 11 years. They're going to leave hundreds of thousands of people living in a commuter hell in Meath for the next 11 years. So our campaign wants to put pressure on the government in terms of that. We have, in fairness, got a meeting with Sean Canny, who's a junior minister for rail. That's happening in the next 2 weeks. And we'll be looking for the government to completely reduce the length of time for the building of that rail line. Yes,
and the Defence Forces is something you brought up in the Dáil, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Roisin, who's this is a subject that's very important.
The Defence Forces, you made a statement yesterday about the Defence Forces and America and Israel and the UN.
Yeah, so Aontu has been fighting for the Defence Forces for a long period of time. I will say that. So we have an incredible situation that for the last 10 years, our Defence Forces have collapsed in terms of numbers. And the reason that's happening is the government are not providing proper pay terms and conditions to those men and women who are doing a fantastic job in actually defending our country. Incredibly, we have a proud record of peacekeeping in the likes of South Lebanon for many, many years. I think 30,000 soldiers have served in South Lebanon since 1978. 47 Irish soldiers died in the service of peace in that location in that period of time. And now it looks that, unfortunately, the US has agreed with Israel to pull its support for the UN Security Council decision for that UNIFIL mission. And that means, if it happens in the next couple of months, that Ireland will no longer be able to send our soldiers into South Lebanon. And that's a disaster for a number of reasons. It's a disaster for the men and women and the families that live in South Lebanon. We've seen Israel being hyper-aggressive in many ways over the last while. But it's also a disaster for the men and women who have sacrificed so much. It will have a material effect on their salaries and on their wages. And we're calling for the government, first of all, to push back on America, to try to get America to change its mind, to make sure that a peace mission remains. If that can't happen, to fulfill any contracts in terms of income that exist at the moment, so those men and women who have made decisions on the basis of promised incomes do not lose their income.
And our defence forces, we don't even have ships anymore. The retention, the paying conditions have improved, but where is it all going?
So it is quite incredible that we don't have the ability to float one naval ship at the moment, even though there's about 7 or 8 naval ships. We have a situation where the government allowed a cyber attack into this country, which cost €100 million and cost countless deaths and ill health as a result. At the time, the government were investing less money in the National Cybersecurity Centre than the Department of the Taoiseach, one department, spent on press statements in that given year. So more money on press statements in one department than on the whole National Cybersecurity Centre in a given year. And that shows you the priority of government in terms of the defence of this country. Now, there has been a small increase in numbers just in the last year, and there's been a small increase in income levels in the last year. But if you want to make sure good men and women commit their lives to the defence of this country, you have to provide proper pay terms and conditions, and the government simply haven't done that. They provided nothing but lip service in terms of the defence forces.
Because our men and women in our defence forces, they sign an oath when they enter in the recruitment stage, and then afterwards to defend our country and protect our citizens. That is a big honour and a big oath for any young man or woman in Ireland. It's an honour to serve your country.
It is an honour to serve our country, and we owe those men and women a debt of gratitude for all of the work that they have done. And signing that oath also means that they're set apart from other workers in the country. They don't have the same rights in terms of representing their needs and their rights with the government. And I think that the government has abused that oath in reality. They haven't lived up to their side of the bargain in terms of that oath, because that oath gives a commitment on behalf of those men and women, but there's a reciprocal responsibility from the government to provide proper pay terms and conditions on behalf of that oath, and the government have not lived up to that. The government are an absolute disgrace when it comes to the Irish Defence Forces.
The Irish Political Roundup, and we sent you a copy of the petition. The proposal is to have an annual national thank you for your service days for the Defence Forces, but also for the Garda Síochána and all our frontline services.
Yeah, we would love to see that put in place. We think that will be only right and proper. Sometimes you see people in here give soft soaping or platitudes, and I often say, if the defence forces, if the Gardaí, if people in emergency services were paid with platitudes, they'd be very rich. But you can't spend platitudes in the shop. You need to be able to make sure that you have proper currency to be able to pay for rent and housing. But we also need to take a day out as well to prioritise the men and women who defend our country. We actually have a bill in the Dáil as well, which would like to see a mandatory minimum sentence for a person in terms of a violent attack against somebody working for the emergency services in this country, from the Gardaí to the people who work in our hospitals to the fire services as well. Too many people who put on a uniform to defend this country actually find that they are actually injured by the work that they do. There's no fear among some people in terms of delivering those injuries. We need to put that fear back in there to make sure that we have the back of people working for this country.
And when you think we're talking about the defence forces and people have been injured, we cannot forget Private Sean Rooney up in Lifford and up in Donegal, and his colleague who was brutally injured. And so it's thinking of their family, Private Sean Rooney's family up in Donegal at this time.
We do, and that's an enormous sacrifice. The ultimate sacrifice was made by Private Sean Rooney in terms of defending the peace process and the peace in South Lebanon. And there are questions, I think, to be answered by the government in terms of the level of protection that was afforded to Sean Rooney And I think that the government should be more forthcoming with information. We need to push hard in relation to making sure that everybody who puts on a uniform, who puts their life in danger, has the necessary capabilities, the necessary technology, and the necessary protection to be able to do the job in a safe manner.
We would like to talk to the men and women of the 126 Infill Battalion over in South Lebanon. Would you like to send them a message and a message to their families back home?
Yes, indeed. I would like to thank them so much for all of the work that they're doing. I'd like to thank them for the sacrifices that they are making in terms of peace in that area. This is a particularly dark and savage and gruesome time in the Middle East. It's absolutely horrendous conditions, and people have come under fire, people have come under bombardment, and for a man and a woman to put their hand up and to volunteer to stand with peace and with the citizens of that region is an enormous sacrifice. We want to thank you for that work, and we want to make sure that the government here stand by the contracts and the commitments that they have made to them in terms of income and in terms of support as well.
And we thank them for their service.
We thank them very much for their service, absolutely.
Peader Toibin, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you for the opportunity, greatly appreciate it.
Oh my God.